In episode number 36, I showed you how to set up a Rails project using Subversion. Well, there's another source code management system out there, which has been getting a lot of buzz lately. You may have heard of it. It's called Git. So in this episode, I want to show you how to focus on creating a Rails project using Git. So let me dive into the command line. Let's create a new Rails project here. Now if we go into that, it's actually incredibly easy to turn a Rails project into a Git repository. All you have to do is type git init, and instantly this project becomes a Git repository. So the way Git works is a little bit different than Subversion, because with Subversion you have the central hosted repository somewhere and you always communicate with that. With Git, actually, your repository is on your local computer, and if it's up to you if you want another repository elsewhere that you can push and pull changes from. So all repositories are created equal, and there's not necessarily one which is the central repository. Okay, so back to the basics here, how we set up a Rails project. You'll likely want to create a .gitignore file. That way you can specify which files you don't want to include in your Rails project, in your repository, excuse me. You'll likely want to ignore all dsstore files, .dsstore, and because on Mac OS X it just has a tendency to add those files everywhere and can be rather annoying if they're in your repository. So ignore those. We'll also ignore our log files and our temp directories, and also our config database YAML file. And last but not least, if you're using SQLite, you'll want to ignore that as well. The SQLite databases. And that's, by the way, the new default in Rails 2. If you create a new Rails project, it'll use SQLite by default instead of MySQL. Okay, so that looks good. That's pretty much the standard files you'll want to ignore from your going into your repository. So let's try typing git status to see the files that need to be added for committing. And here's our list of files, but notice that some directories are missing. Our temp log and vendor directories aren't here. Well, that's because when Git considers a directory empty, it doesn't add it to your repository, it just ignores it completely. So you may want to add an empty directory to your repository. And to get around that, it's actually a little bit of a hack, but it's the only way I know how to do it, is to make an empty .gitignore file in each of those directories. Just like this. And then our vendor directory as well. There we go. And now if we do a git status, you see that those directories show up now. Alright, so how do we add all these new files and prepare them for committing? Well, it's actually really easy. Git add and then dot. We'll take all new files in the project, and then if we do git commit, and usually you want to pass the -a option all the time when you're committing through Git. And I'm just going to pass -m to do a message, say initial import. There we go, it adds all of our files to our Git repository. And that's pretty much it. That's set up a Rails project using Git. I mean, it's incredibly easy. Let me just show you real quick. Let's say we make a change here. Let's generate a model. I'll give it a name column maybe. There we go. And okay, we made some changes here. Now how do we commit these changes? Well, you'll likely want to migrate the database first. And then to commit the changes, you do basically the same thing. You do git add, and then if you want to add all the files that were new, you just do add dot and git commit -a -m, adding a task model. And there we go, committed our changes. So it's really easy to just set up and running using Git with your Rails application. Now there's a whole lot of other things I'd love to get into, but unfortunately this episode is getting long enough already. There's merging and branching. I highly recommend you check that out because it's just, I think, the killer feature with Git is how easy it is to merge branches between themselves. It just encourages you to use branches a lot more, which is really useful if you're adding features that take several days to add to your Rails application. But there's a lot of resources that I'm going to link to in my show notes at railscast.com. Particularly, there's a couple screencasts I want you to check out. There's one by Peepcode, actually, our sponsor. You can check out at peepcode.com and just look for Git screencast on there. And also, there's another great screencast by Scott Chacon, and I'll post a link to the show notes on that. And that screencast is on deploying a Rails application using Git, and it's really well done too. So check that out at the show notes, and I'll see you next time. This episode is sponsored by Peepcode. Please visit peepcode.com and check out their latest screencasts on Ruby on Rails.